Marijuana in the United States is federally illegal. However, according to a survey by Pew Research, over 2/3 of Americans believe that marijuana should be legalized. So, if America is a democratic country where the power is in the people, why is marijuana still federally illegal? Well, after 100 years of prohibition, it's not as simple as one may think. And so to understand this question, one must first understand the history of marijuana in the United States, as well as all the other factors that affect legalization. Marijuana in the United States originates within minority groups. According to Barney Wharf, a professor at the University of Kansas, plantation owners used marijuana to pacify slaves. Furthermore, in the mid to late 19th century, Hispanics who had immigrated to the United States enjoyed the recreational effects of marijuana. Unfortunately, America's racial prejudice towards Hispanics and African Americans and marijuana's association with them produced reactionary prejudices that stigmatized marijuana, prompting crude public campaigns to criminalize the drug. The arguments against marijuana were not at all grounded in scientific evidence. They are grounded in hearsay and stereotypes. Furthermore, cannabis is grown from the ground and is in fact a weed, hence where the term weed comes from. Derived from the stems of marijuana plants, hemp fibers have many uses that overlap with cotton. Hemp's industrial uses include textiles, agriculture, automotive, food and beverages, paper, furniture, construction, recycling, and personal care. As hemp started to gain popularity in the early 20th century, big cotton corporations saw hemp as a major threat to their profits and thus pushed for cannabis to be illegal, strictly because it threatened their profits. Ultimately, the racial prejudices against immigrants and African Americans and the threat that hemp posed to the cotton industry led to the federal prohibition of cannabis in 1937 with the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act. Then, about 30 years later, Congress replaced the Marijuana Tax Act. The new act categorized drugs into schedules based on their medicinal use and potential for abuse. This would pave the way for the U.S. president to declare an international war on drugs.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
An overwhelming percentage of drug users who were targeted by the war on drugs were people of color or struggling with unemployment, poor skills, low income, poor housing, and bad health and family environments.
It's resulted in very, very high levels of incarceration for Black and brown folks, whereas folks who look, act, and talk like you and me have not necessarily paid the same price.
The war on drugs consisted of overly punitive laws for small-scale offenses.
Behaviors that would often not be sort of identified as problem areas, like jaywalking or jumping the turnstile or urinating in public, sort of these low-level offenses, small possession of marijuana.
There was little differentiation between use and possession at one end of the scale and large-scale trafficking with links to organized crime at the other end.
I think intent versus impact is important to consider, because I think there are a lot of times where we don't intend to do one thing, but the impact clearly shows that. In our own efforts, without us even realizing it, we are targeting. We are putting all of our time and efforts and money in one area. So I'd like to say that whether or not it was racially motivated, we see the disproportionate racial impact.
Legalization of marijuana is the reversal of a drug war that has lasted for over 50 years. Another factor affecting legalization is public health and education.
The vast majority of people who use marijuana will do so in a way that doesn't impact their health, doesn't impact their kids or the people around them, and they're using that as a substitute for having 5 beers at night. I don't have an issue with that. Don't show up high at work, particularly if you're operating heavy machinery. The same things I would say about alcohol, I would say for marijuana. And so I think there's a way to use it responsibly, and I think the vast majority of the population does. What I worry about is people who have anxiety and depression who begin smoking marijuana instead of going to get a diagnosis and going to get some help. If we started fresh and said, all right, we have a choice here. Do we legalize alcohol or marijuana? I would choose marijuana all day. But alcohol has been legal and alcohol is used in immense quantities. And so then it becomes, so on top of alcohol, do you really want marijuana too?
Another major issue facing legalization is a lack of public education. There's a negative stigma associated with marijuana, and so when some people hear it, they immediately dismiss it without even taking the time to educate themselves.
Whenever you legalize something, doesn't matter what it is, there's an upside and a downside.
Yeah.
The downside in this case is that potentially, and not definitely, but potentially more people use it, that it has an impact on public health. And I'm thinking expressly here about impaired driving, which impacts Long Island far more than it would the 5 boroughs of New York City. And I don't think that we've done, or the state has done a good enough job in educating folks and guarding against the potential downsides in doing this. So I worry. There's some simple ways to guard against the downside, and then there's more complicated ways. One of the simple ways is there should have been a public education campaign that was rolled out at the same time legalization happened, to say just because it is legal doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. We simply said, all right, let's legalize it and see what happens. So for the vast majority of the population, using alcohol and or marijuana is not going to pose any life-changing problems unless you make some lousy decisions like driving a car while you're high. But generally, smoking weed at your house, drinking wine at your house is not going to cause anybody any kind of problem. Oh, I think this is all about the money, right? Yeah. Whenever somebody says it's not about the money, it's about the money.
The excise taxes that can be levied on marijuana can be quite lucrative. The Tax Foundation calculated what the potential gross tax revenue would be for the states that have yet to legalize recreational cannabis. The calculation was based on average taxes paid per marijuana user in states with a market minimum of at least 3 years. I applied Benford's law to the calculation of potential revenue, and the data roughly follows, showing there is a legitimacy in these calculations. So where can this money go? This money can go towards the communities most affected by the war on drugs.
But there's this big wall called capital that these people traditionally don't have access to. So where can we figure out ways to pull that wall down?
Furthermore, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, police dedicate about $3.6 billion annually enforcing possession laws and make about 820,000 arrests per year. So not only can legalization accumulate significant tax revenue, it can also allocate the immense police resources that are spent on marijuana-related arrests. Today, marijuana is legal in 18 states and the District of Columbia and is increasing year by year, addressing racial justice, public health, and economic opportunity into a single bill is an audacious effort. Jason Starr, a member of the New York Office of Cannabis Management, suggested that this can and should be done.